The camera flashes lit up the entrance of Westminster Abbey like lightning during a storm. Two women stood at the center of Britain's most important moments, yet the headlines about them couldn't be more different. Queen Camilla, once the most hated woman in Britain, now carried herself with quiet dignity beside King Charles. Princess Catherine, the future queen, smiled warmly as photographers captured her every move. But behind those smiles lay years of vastly different treatment by the same media that now documented their lives. The story begins decades ago. When both women first entered the spotlight of the British royal family, Camilla Parker Bowles was already a controversial figure before she even married Prince Charles. The media painted her as the woman who destroyed a fairy tale marriage. Every newspaper seemed to have an opinion about her relationship with Charles, and most of those opinions were harsh. She was called names that would make anyone cringe. The press followed her everywhere, waiting for her to make a mistake they could splash across front pages. Meanwhile, Catherine Middleton's introduction to royal life came with a completely different narrative. When she began dating Prince William at university, the media was curious but generally kind. They called her Waity Katie when the engagement took longer than expected. But even that nickname carried a playful tone rather than real malice. The press seemed charmed by her middle-class background and her genuine smile. They wrote about her fashion choices with admiration and her family with interest rather than judgment. The difference in treatment became obvious from the very beginning. When Camilla appeared in public with Charles, photographers would capture unflattering angles and newspapers would run stories questioning her motives. Headlines suggested she was only interested in Charles for his title and wealth. Royal experts on television would discuss whether she was suitable for royal life, often concluding she was not. The public seemed to agree with this assessment, the polls showing low approval ratings for Charles's relationship. Catherine's early media coverage told a completely different story. When she attended her first official events with William, photographers seemed to catch her best angles. Fashion magazines praised her style choices and called her a breath of fresh air for the monarchy. Television commentators spoke about how she represented a modern approach to royal duties. Even when she made small mistakes with protocol, the media treated these moments as charming rather than concerning. The contrast became even more striking when both women faced personal scrutiny. Every aspect of Camilla's past was examined and often criticized. Her previous marriage was discussed in detail, with many suggesting she had no right to marry into the royal family as a divorced woman. Her children from her first marriage were often mentioned in ways that implied they were complications rather than normal family relationships. The media seemed determined to find fault with every choice she had made throughout her life. Catherine faced scrutiny too, but the media approached her background with curiosity rather than hostility. When newspapers wrote about her family's party supply business, they presented it as an interesting success story rather than something embarrassing. Her mother's ambitions for her daughters were portrayed as natural parental pride rather than social climbing. Even when tabloids published photos of Catherine in bikinis during private vacations, the tone was often more admiring than invasive. The wedding announcements for both women revealed just how differently the media viewed their roles. When Charles and Camilla announced their engagement, many newspapers questioned whether the public would accept her as queen consort. Editorial writers debated whether she deserved the title and what it would mean for the monarchy's reputation. Television programs featured discussions about whether she could ever win over the British people who had loved Diana so much. William and Catherine's engagement announcement was met with celebration. Across all media platforms, newspapers competed to get the most beautiful photos of the couple. Television networks planned extensive coverage of their wedding as if it were a national celebration. Magazine covers featured Catherine in wedding dress mock-ups months before the actual ceremony. The media treated their upcoming marriage as exactly what the royal family needed to modernize and stay relevant. The difference in treatment extended to how the media discussed their fitness for royal duties. Critics questioned whether Camilla understood the weight of royal responsibility or if she had the character necessary to represent the crown. They pointed to her past as evidence that she might not be trustworthy in such an important role. Some suggested that her marriage, too, Charles, was selfish because it would damage the monarchy's reputation with the public. Catherine faced almost no such questioning. About her character or fitness for royal life, Instead, media coverage focused on how well she seemed to understand her future role, and how naturally she appeared to handle public appearances. Royal commentators praised her composure and suggested she would bring exactly the kind of stability the monarchy needed. Rather than questioning her worthiness, they seemed to assume she would succeed. The personal attacks on Camilla were particularly harsh during her early years in the spotlight. Tabloid newspapers seemed to compete to find the most unflattering photos of her. They criticized her appearance, her age, and her fashion choices with a cruelty that went far beyond normal celebrity coverage. Social media platforms, when they emerged, became spaces where people felt free to express even harsher opinions about her right to be part of the royal family. Catherine's appearance and fashion choices received completely different treatment. Fashion magazines regularly featured her outfits with admiration and detailed coverage of where readers could buy similar items. When she repeated outfits, the media praised her for being relatable and environmentally conscious. Even when she had bad hair days or unflattering photos, these were rarely published or were presented as proof of her. Would continue to shape how both women were perceived by the public for years to come. Camilla would have to work twice as hard to earn positive coverage. While Catherine seemed to receive the benefit of the doubt from the very beginning, the media had set the stage for two completely different narratives about women, who would both become central figures in the modern British royal family. The wedding bells of Westminster Abbey rang out across London. But the media coverage of two royal weddings told completely different stories. When Prince Charles married Camilla Parker Bowles in 2005, the ceremony was deliberately small and quiet. The couple chose a civil ceremony, followed by a blessing at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. The media approached this wedding with careful politeness, rather than celebration. Many newspapers described it as a necessary formality rather than a joyous occasion. Television coverage was respectful but restrained. Commentators spoke about the ceremony as the end of a long and complicated chapter rather than the beginning of something wonderful. The guest list was small, and even the Queen initially planned not to attend the civil ceremony, though she did come to the blessing. Media coverage focused heavily on this detail, suggesting it showed the family's mixed feelings about the marriage. The fashion coverage of Camilla's wedding dress was polite but lukewarm. Newspapers described her cream-colored outfit designed by Anna Valentine as appropriate and elegant, but few called it stunning or memorable. The media seemed to struggle with how to present a divorced woman marrying the heir to the throne. Many articles spent more time explaining the legal and religious complexities of the marriage than celebrating the couple's happiness. 6 years later, Westminster Abbey witnessed a completely different kind of royal wedding. When Prince William married Catherine Middleton in 2011, the media treated it as the event of the decade. Television networks around the world provided hours of coverage leading up to the ceremony. Newspapers published special editions with dozens of pages dedicated to every detail of the celebration. The public was invited to participate in the joy. Through street parties and viewing events, Catherine's wedding dress became an instant global phenomenon. Designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, the dress was analyzed and praised by fashion experts worldwide. The media coverage was breathless with admiration. Newspapers called it a perfect balance of modern style and royal tradition. Fashion magazines compared it to Grace Kelly's wedding dress and declared Catherine an instant style icon. The dress even influenced wedding fashion trends for years afterward. The difference in media, the tone between the two weddings, was impossible to ignore. Charles and Camilla's wedding was presented as a quiet resolution to a long controversy. The media approached it with duty rather than enthusiasm. Headlines were respectful but restrained, focusing on the constitutional implications rather than romantic celebration. The coverage suggested that the public should accept this marriage, but not necessarily celebrate it. William and Catherine's wedding was presented as a fairy tale come to life. The media coverage was filled with superlatives and excitement. Headlines celebrated the love story and the hope it represented for the monarchy's future. Television commentators spoke about the couple with genuine warmth and optimism. The global audience was estimated at over 2 billion people. The media treated this as proof of the couple's universal appeal. The guest coverage revealed another stark difference. At Charles and Camilla's wedding, the media focused heavily on who was not there as much as who attended. The absence of certain family members and the small guest list became talking points that suggested ongoing tensions. Royal experts discussed what these absences meant for family relationships and public acceptance of the marriage. Catherine's wedding guest list was covered like a who's who of global importance. The media celebrated the mix of royalty, celebrities, and Catherine's own family and friends. When her sister Pippa became an overnight sensation, the coverage was positive and exciting rather than critical. The media presented the guest list as proof of how well Catherine fit into royal life while maintaining her own identity. The honeymoon coverage also showed different approaches. Charles and Camilla's honeymoon in Scotland was covered briefly and respectfully. The media gave them privacy and covered their return to duties with business-like reporting. There was little speculation about their private moments or romantic details. The coverage suggested that this was simply what was expected, rather than something to celebrate. William and Catherine's honeymoon in the Seychelles received extensive coverage despite efforts to maintain privacy. The media was fascinated by every detail they could discover. When photos emerged of the couple on vacation, newspapers published them with captions about their obvious happiness. The coverage treated their private moments as glimpses into a perfect royal romance. The early married life coverage continued these different patterns. Camilla's adjustment to royal duties was covered with careful monitoring. The media seemed to be watching for mistakes or signs that she was struggling with her new role. When she performed well at engagements, the coverage was positive but often surprised, as if good performance was unexpected rather than natural. Catherine's early royal duties received glowing coverage from the beginning. The media seemed eager to find evidence of her success in royal life. When she spoke at events or interacted with the public, newspapers praised her natural ability and confidence. Royal experts regularly commented on how well she understood her role and how effectively she was modernizing royal engagement. With the public, the pregnancy announcements for both women revealed continuing differences in media treatment. When Camilla's stepchildren had children, the coverage was warm but focused on Charles becoming a step-grandfather. The media treated these family developments as natural progressions, but not major royal news. The coverage was positive but relatively quiet compared to other royal baby announcements. Catherine's pregnancy announcements were treated as major news events. The media covered every detail from the official announcements to speculation about due dates and potential names. Newspapers published articles about royal baby traditions and what the pregnancies meant for the line of succession. Television programs featured royal experts discussing the significance of each pregnancy for the monarchies. The maternity fashion coverage showed perhaps the starkest difference between how the two women were treated. Camilla rarely faced pregnancy coverage since she was past childbearing age when she married Charles. But her general fashion choices continued to receive polite but unremarkable attention. The media seemed to view her style as appropriate but not particularly noteworthy or influential. Catherine's maternity style became a global phenomenon. Every outfit she wore while pregnant was analyzed and copied by women around the world. Fashion magazines tracked down the exact items she wore and reported when they sold out within hours. The media treated her maternity fashion as proof of her influence and style leadership. Even her choice to repeat outfits during pregnancy was praised as relatable and environmentally conscious. This period established patterns that would continue throughout both women's royal careers. With the media maintaining vastly different standards and expectations for their public roles and personal choices, the charity work of both women revealed another dimension of how differently the media treated Queen Camilla and Princess Catherine. When Camilla took on her first royal patronages, newspapers covered her involvement with careful scrutiny. The media seemed to question whether her heart was truly in the work or if she was simply fulfilling expected duties. Every charity event was analyzed for signs of genuine commitment versus obligation. Camilla chose to focus on causes that were deeply personal to her, particularly domestic violence and literacy. Her work with organizations supporting victims of domestic abuse was groundbreaking for the royal family. But the media coverage was cautious rather than celebratory. Newspapers reported on her visits to shelters and support centers with respect, but often included background paragraphs about her controversial past, as if questioning whether someone with her history could be an effective advocate for vulnerable women. When Camilla visited a rape crisis center or spoke about domestic violence, the media coverage was factual but restrained. Royal reporters seemed unsure how to present a woman who had been vilified for breaking up a marriage, now working to help women in dangerous relationships. The irony was not lost on commentators, and some articles explicitly questioned whether she was the right person to represent these causes. Catherine's early charity work received completely different treatment. When she chose to focus on early childhood development and mental health, the media immediately praised her for selecting important and timely causes. Her visits to hospitals and community centers were covered with enthusiasm and detailed positive reporting. Newspapers published photo spreads showing her genuine interactions with children and families. With captions emphasizing her natural empathy and connection, the media treated Catherine's charity choices as evidence of her intelligence and social awareness. When she launched her early years initiative, newspapers published extensive articles about the importance of the cause and how her involvement could make a real difference. Television programs featured experts praising her decision to focus on such a crucial area of social development. The photography at charity events told its own story about media treatment. Pictures of Camilla at charity functions were often formal and somewhat stiff. Photographers seemed to capture her in official poses rather than candid moments of connection. When newspapers published these photos, they were usually accompanied by straightforward reporting about the event without much commentary about her personal impact or emotional connection to the cause. Catherine's charity photography consistently showed her in warm, engaging moments. Photographers captured her laughing with children, listening intently to people sharing their stories, and participating actively in activities. These images were published with captions that emphasized her genuine care and natural ability to connect with people from all backgrounds. The visual storytelling suggested someone was born to do this kind of work. The speech coverage revealed another layer of different treatment. When Camilla gave speeches about her causes, the media focused primarily on the content and the issues, rather than her delivery or personal impact. Newspapers would report what she said, but rarely commented on how effectively she communicated or whether her words seemed to resonate with audiences. The coverage was professional, but lacked the enthusiasm reserved for other royal speakers. Catherine's speeches received detailed analysis of both content and delivery. The media regularly praised her speaking ability and her apparent comfort with public presentations. When she spoke about mental health or early childhood development, newspapers published articles about how articulate and passionate she seemed. Royal experts commented on her growing confidence as a public speaker and her ability to bring attention to important issues. The international charity work coverage showed similar patterns. When Camilla accompanied Charles on overseas tours that included charity visits, the media coverage focused heavily on the official aspects of the visits. Newspapers reported on the organizations they visited and the causes they supported. But the coverage read like diplomatic reporting rather than human interest stories. The focus was on protocol and official business rather than personal connection. Catherine's international charity work was covered like a combination of diplomacy and celebrity humanitarian work. When she visited overseas projects or spoke about global issues, the media coverage emphasized both the official importance of her role and her personal commitment to the causes. Newspapers published articles about how her involvement brought international attention to important issues and how effectively she represented British values abroad. The behind-the-scenes coverage of their charity work revealed perhaps the most striking differences. Media reports about Camilla's charity involvement rarely included details about her personal preparation or emotional investment in the causes. When newspapers wrote about her work, they focused on the public appearances and official statements rather than any personal journey or learning process. Catherine's charity work was often covered as a personal mission. The media published articles about how she prepared for visits by reading extensively about issues and meeting with experts. Newspapers reported on her private meetings with charity leaders and her ongoing commitment to learning about the causes she supported. This coverage suggested someone who was intellectually and emotionally invested in making a real difference. The impact coverage also differed significantly. When organizations that Camilla supported received increased attention or funding, the media coverage was factual but rarely connected this success directly to her involvement. Newspapers might mention that organizations had seen increased support, but they typically did not suggest that. Camilla's patronage was the primary reason for this growth. Catherine's charity impact was regularly highlighted and celebrated. When organizations she supported received increased donations or attention, the media explicitly connected this success to her involvement. Newspapers published articles with headlines like "Catherine Effect Boosts Charity," and detailed reporting about how her patronage had transformed organizations' ability to reach their goals. That the media also covered their approaches to charity work differently. Camilla's methodical, private approach to learning about issues was rarely mentioned in coverage. Her preference for working behind the scenes and avoiding publicity for her charitable learning process meant that the media presented her involvement as more superficial than it actually was. Catherine's collaborative approach with charity leaders was regularly featured in media coverage. Newspapers published articles about her working sessions with experts and her commitment to understanding complex social issues. This coverage presented her as someone who took her charitable responsibilities seriously and worked hard to be an effective advocate for her causes. The long-term commitment coverage revealed ongoing different standards. Even as Camilla continued working with the same causes for years and developed genuine expertise in areas like domestic violence prevention, the media coverage remained somewhat cautious about praising her impact or effectiveness. Catherine's growing involvement with her chosen causes was covered as an inspiring example of royal duty done right. The media regularly published articles about her developing expertise and her increasing influence on important social issues, treating her charitable work as a model for modern royal engagement. Fashion became one of the most visible ways the media treated Queen Camilla and Princess Catherine differently. Every public appearance meant scrutiny of their clothing choices, but the tone and focus of this coverage revealed vastly different standards and expectations for the two women. Camilla's fashion choices were consistently described in functional rather than aspirational terms. When she appeared at official events, fashion reporters focused on whether her outfits were appropriate for the occasion rather than whether they were beautiful or inspiring. Newspapers would describe her clothing with words like suitable, proper, or conservative. The coverage suggested that her primary goal should be not to make mistakes rather than to look stunning or set trends. The media rarely featured Camilla's outfits in fashion spreads or style guides. When fashion magazines mentioned her clothing, it was usually in the context of royal protocol rather than style inspiration. Her choice of British designers was noted approvingly, but the coverage focused more on supporting local industry than on the aesthetic appeal of the clothes themselves. Fashion experts interviewed about her choices typically emphasized appropriateness over beauty. Catherine's fashion coverage was completely different from the beginning. Every outfit she wore was analyzed not just for appropriateness, but for style, leadership, and trend-setting potential. Fashion magazines regularly featured her looks in glossy photo spreads with detailed information about designers, costs, and where readers could buy similar items. Her clothing choices were treated as news events that could influence what women around the world would want to wear. The Catherine effect became a recognized phenomenon in fashion journalism. When she wore an item from a particular brand, news stories would follow, tracking how quickly the item sold out and how much attention it brought to the designer. Newspapers published articles about her influence on the fashion industry and her ability to boost sales for both high-end designers and accessible high-street brands. The photography of their fashion choices revealed different approaches. Pictures of Camilla at events typically showed her full outfit in context of the occasion. Photographers captured her in official poses that emphasized the formality of events, rather than highlighting the details or beauty of her clothing. These photos were functional rather than glamorous, focusing on documentation rather than fashion photography. Catherine's fashion photography was treated like magazine shoots, even at official events. Photographers captured multiple angles of her outfits and focused on details like accessories and styling choices. These images were published with the kind of attention to lighting and composition usually reserved for fashion models. The photos were designed to inspire readers to emulate her style rather than simply document her attendance at events. The budget coverage of their fashion choices now showed another stark difference. When media outlets discussed the cost of Camilla's clothing, coverage was matter-of-fact and rarely criticized spending. The focus was typically on supporting British designers rather than the expense of individual items. Fashion reporters seemed to assume that her clothing budget was reasonable and appropriate for her role. Catherine's fashion budget became a regular topic of media coverage, but the approach was complex. While some outlets occasionally questioned expensive designer purchases, the majority of coverage focused on her skill at mixing high-end pieces with affordable items. The media praised her for wearing clothes multiple times and for choosing accessible brands that allowed regular people to copy her style. This coverage suggested that she was both glamorous and relatable. The accessory coverage revealed particularly interesting differences. Camilla's jewelry and accessories were typically mentioned only when they had historical significance or were gifts from other royals. The media coverage focused on the protocol and tradition aspects rather than the style elements. Fashion reporters rarely discussed how her accessories completed her looks or influenced trends. Catherine's accessories became news stories in their own right. Her handbags, shoes, and jewelry were photographed from multiple angles and featured in detailed articles about where they came from and how much they cost. Fashion magazines published guides to getting her accessory looks and tracked which brands she favored. Even her choice of tights or nail polish colors became topics of fashion coverage. The recycling coverage showed how the media applied different standards to similar behaviors. When Camilla wore outfits multiple times, the media coverage was neutral and factual. Fashion reporters would note repeat appearances without much commentary, suggesting this was simply normal and expected. Its behavior for someone in her position. Catherine's outfit recycling was covered as evidence of her admirable values. Fashion magazines published articles praising her for re-wearing clothes and setting a positive example about sustainability. When she appeared in the same dress at multiple events, the coverage focused on how this showed her down-to-earth nature and environmental consciousness. The media treated her recycling as a conscious choice, worthy of praise rather than simply practical behavior. The maternity fashion coverage highlighted perhaps the most dramatic difference in treatment. During Catherine's pregnancies, every outfit was analyzed for how it showcased her changing figure while maintaining royal appropriateness. Fashion magazines published weekly updates on her maternity style and detailed guides to achieving similar looks. The coverage treated her pregnant fashion choices as a masterclass in elegant, expectant mother dressing. The formal event coverage showed consistently different approaches. At state dinners and official ceremonies, Camilla's gown choices were reported with respect but little enthusiasm. Fashion coverage focused on protocol requirements and traditional elements rather than beauty or innovation. The media seemed to view her formal wear as meeting expectations rather than exceeding them. Catherine's formal event fashion was covered like red carpet appearances at major award shows. Fashion magazines published detailed analyses of her gown choices with multiple photos and expert commentary about styling decisions. Television coverage often included fashion segments dedicated to breaking down her looks. The media treated her formal wear as entertainment and inspiration rather than simply royal duty. The influence coverage revealed the ultimate difference in how their fashion was perceived. Articles about Camilla's style influence were rare and typically focused on her role in supporting British designers rather than inspiring public fashion choices. The media suggested that her clothing choices were important for industry support but not particularly relevant for style. Inspiration. Catherine's style influence was treated as a major cultural phenomenon. Newspapers regularly published articles about her impact on fashion trends and her ability to shape what women around the world wanted to wear. Fashion experts discussed her styling choices in academic terms, analyzing her ability to balance accessibility with aspiration. The media presented her as someone who understood how to use fashion as a tool for connection and communication. The seasonal coverage also differed significantly. Camilla's wardrobe transitions were covered briefly and functionally, noting appropriate seasonal choices without much style analysis. The media treated her seasonal dressing as meeting basic requirements, rather than demonstrating fashion awareness. Catherine's seasonal style was covered like fashion season previews. Magazines published articles anticipating her spring looks or analyzing her winter wardrobe with detailed trend predictions and shopping guides. The coverage suggested that her seasonal fashion choices were worth studying and emulating by women everywhere.
The family dynamics coverage revealed some of the most striking differences in how the media treated Queen Camilla and Princess Catherine. Both women entered families with complex relationships and established hierarchies. But the media approached their family integration with completely different perspectives and standards. When Camilla married into the royal family, the media coverage focused heavily on the complications her presence might create. Newspapers published articles analyzing how her children from her previous marriage would fit into royal family dynamics. The coverage often presented Tom Parker Bowles and Lavra Lopes as potential problems rather than normal family additions. Royal experts speculated about whether the family would fully accept Camilla's children and how their presence might affect traditional royal protocols. The media also extensively covered Camilla's relationship with William and Harry. Every interaction was analyzed for signs of tension or acceptance. When the princes appeared at events with Camilla, newspapers would publish articles reading body language and searching for clues about their true feelings toward their stepmother. The coverage suggested that the boys' acceptance of Camilla was crucial for her success in the family but remained uncertain. Catherine's family integration was covered as a heartwarming success story from the beginning. When her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, appeared at royal events, the media coverage was positive and welcoming. Newspapers published articles about how well her family fit into royal occasions and how gracefully they handled their new status. The coverage suggested that the royal family was enriched by the addition of the Middleton family rather than complicated by it. The grandchildren coverage showed particularly stark differences. When Charles's step-grandchildren through Camilla attended royal events, the media coverage was polite but restrained. Newspapers would mention their presence without much detail or personality coverage. The children were presented as part of the extended family but not as central figures in royal family dynamics. Catherine's children became media darlings from birth. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were covered like celebrity children, with detailed articles about their personalities, development, and public appearances. The media treated every milestone as significant royal news and analyzed their behavior at public events with affection and interest. Coverage suggested that these children represented the future of the monarchy and were naturally captivating to the public. The relationship with Queen Elizabeth coverage revealed different media approaches to family acceptance. When Camilla appeared with the late Queen at events, the media coverage was carefully neutral. Newspapers reported on their interactions without much commentary about warmth or personal connection. The coverage suggested professional courtesy rather than genuine family affection, even as their relationship actually warmed over time. Catherine's relationship with Queen Elizabeth was covered as a special bond from early in her marriage. The media regularly published articles about the Queen's apparent fondness for Catherine and her approval of her approach to royal duties. Stories about private moments between them, such as the Queen lending Catherine jewelry or including her in smaller family gatherings, were covered as evidence of genuine affection and acceptance. The sibling dynamics coverage also showed different treatment. Camilla's relationship with Princess Anne and other members of Charles's generation was covered briefly and formally. The media reported on their joint appearances at events, but rarely speculated about personal relationships or friendships. The coverage suggested professional cooperation rather than warm family bonds. Catherine's relationships with other royal family members were covered as developing friendships. The media published articles about her growing close to Sophie, Countess of Wessex, and her apparent comfortable relationships with other family members. Coverage suggested that she was naturally building genuine connections throughout the extended royal family. The holiday and private family event coverage revealed particularly interesting differences. When Camilla joined the royal family for Christmas at Sandringham or other traditional gatherings, the media coverage was factual but not particularly warm. Newspapers would report on her attendance without much speculation about family dynamics or personal enjoyment of the occasions. Catherine's participation in royal family holidays was covered like glimpses into a happy family life. The media published articles speculating about family traditions she might be learning and how she was contributing to holiday celebrations. Coverage of her at Balmoral or Sandringham suggested someone who was naturally fitting into established family patterns while adding her own touches. The Crises coverage showed how differently the media treated both women during family difficulties. When scandals or controversies affected the royal family, Camilla's role was often mentioned cautiously. The media seemed uncertain about her place in family decision-making and rarely suggested she was a central figure in family crisis management. Catherine's role during family difficulties was covered as naturally supportive and stabilizing. When the royal family faced challenges, media coverage often highlighted her steady presence and supportive role. Articles suggested that she provided strength and normalcy during difficult periods and that her influence on family dynamics was consistently positive. The parenting coverage revealed dramatic differences in media treatment. Camilla's experience as a mother was rarely discussed in detail, and her relationships with her adult children were covered primarily when they appeared at official events. The media treated her parenting experience as private family business rather than relevant public information. Catherine's approach to motherhood became a constant source of media fascination. Newspapers published detailed articles about her parenting philosophy, her efforts to give her children normal experiences, and her balance of royal duties with family life. The coverage suggested that she was setting new standards for royal parenting, and that her approach was worth studying and emulating. The extended family coverage showed continuing patterns. When Camilla's siblings or other relatives appeared in public contexts, the media coverage was brief and factual. These family members were treated as private individuals who occasionally intersected with royal life rather than as people of independent public interest. Catherine's extended family received ongoing media attention and generally positive coverage. Her sister Pippa's wedding was covered extensively, and her brother James received sympathetic coverage during his personal struggles. The media treated the Middleton family as people of legitimate public interest, whose lives and achievements were worth following. The tradition and protocol coverage revealed how the media viewed each woman's impact on family customs. Camilla's influence on royal traditions was rarely discussed, and when it was mentioned, the coverage focused on her adapting to existing customs rather than bringing new ideas to family life. Catherine's impact on royal traditions was covered as positive modernization. The media published articles about how she was helping to update royal family customs while respecting their historical significance. Coverage suggested that she was bringing fresh perspectives that strengthened rather than challenged family traditions. The generational coverage showed how the media viewed their roles in family continuity. Camilla's position as Charles's wife was covered primarily in terms of supporting his role rather than as someone actively shaping the family's future direction. Catherine's role was consistently covered as central to the royal family's future. Media coverage suggested that she understood her position as someone who would help guide the family through generational transition and modernization while maintaining its essential character and values. The coronation of King Charles marked a turning point in how the media covered both Queen Camilla and Princess Catherine, yet the different standards of treatment persisted even during this historic moment. The event revealed how years of contrasting media narratives had shaped public perception and continued to influence coverage of both women leading up to the coronation. Media coverage of Camilla focused heavily on her transformation from controversial figure to queen consort. Newspapers published retrospective articles examining her journey from public enemy to accepted royal, but the tone remained somewhat analytical rather than celebratory. The coverage suggested that her coronation was a remarkable achievement given her difficult beginning, but it was framed as overcoming obstacles rather than natural progression. Catherine's role at the coronation was covered as the natural prominence of a future queen. Media articles focused on her importance to the ceremony and her position as the monarchy's future. The coverage suggested that her presence added glamour and modernity to the traditional event. Fashion magazines prepared extensive coverage of her coronation outfit with the same enthusiasm they brought to her wedding dress coverage years earlier. The preparation coverage revealed familiar patterns. Media reports about Camilla's coronation preparations were respectful but focused primarily on protocol and tradition. Newspapers discussed the historical significance of her crown and the constitutional implications of her new title. The coverage was educational rather than emotional, treating her coronation as an important constitutional moment rather than a personal triumph. Catherine's coronation preparation was covered like a major style event. Fashion magazines published articles anticipating her outfit choices and speculating about which designer she might choose. The media coverage suggested excitement about how she would present herself at this historic moment and confidence that her choices would be both appropriate and inspiring. The ceremony coverage itself showed the established different approaches. Television commentators discussing Camilla during the coronation focused on the historical significance of the moment and the constitutional aspects of her new role. The commentary was respectful and informative but maintained a somewhat formal tone. Royal experts emphasized her dedication to duty and her growth into the role rather than her personal qualities or natural fitness for it. Catherine's coverage during the coronation was filled with admiration and praise. Commentators spoke about her elegance, her natural grace, and how perfectly she seemed to understand the significance of the moment. The coverage suggested that she was born for this kind of occasion and that her presence enhanced the ceremony's meaning and beauty. The international media coverage reflected these domestic patterns on a global scale. Foreign newspapers covering Camilla's coronation focused on the historical achievement and the constitutional changes. The coverage was respectful but emphasized the remarkable nature of her journey rather than suggesting it was always inevitable. International coverage of Catherine at the coronation was enthusiastic and admiring. Foreign media outlets praised her style and presence, with many articles suggesting she represented the best of modern British royalty. The global coverage treated her as a natural star of the ceremony rather than someone whose prominence was surprising. The aftermath coverage revealed continuing different standards. Media analysis of Camilla's performance as the newly crowned queen focused on whether she was meeting expectations and adapting well to her enhanced role. The coverage suggested cautious optimism rather than confident celebration. Articles examined her early decisions as queen and whether she seemed comfortable with her increased responsibilities. Catherine's post-coronation coverage assumed her success and focused on her growing influence. Media articles discussed how the coronation had showcased her readiness for her own eventual queenship and how effectively she was already fulfilling her role as the monarchy's future. The coverage suggested confidence in her abilities rather than uncertainty about her adaptation. The public reaction coverage showed how media treatment had shaped broader perceptions. Polls about Camilla's acceptance as queen showed gradual improvement, but continued mixed feelings among some segments of the public. Media coverage of these polls was factual but still included reminders of her controversial past and the long journey to acceptance. Catherine's public approval ratings were consistently high, and media coverage of public opinion about her was universally positive. Articles about public reaction to her coronation appearance and role focused on admiration and pride rather than acceptance or approval. The coverage suggested that public support for her was assumed rather than questioned. The modernization coverage revealed different expectations for their influence on the monarchy. Media articles about Camilla's impact as queen focused primarily on her continuity with tradition and her support for Charles's vision. The coverage suggested that her role was to help maintain stability rather than drive change or innovation. Catherine's influence on royal modernization was covered as natural and positive. Media articles regularly discussed how she was helping to update royal traditions while respecting their core meaning. The coverage suggested that she understood how to balance tradition with contemporary relevance, and that her influence was making the monarchy more accessible and relatable. The comparative coverage became more explicit after the coronation. Some media outlets began publishing articles directly comparing the two women's journeys and current roles. These comparisons typically acknowledged Camilla's remarkable transformation while emphasizing Catherine's natural fit for royal life. The coverage suggested that both women had found their places in the royal family, but through very different paths. The legacy coverage revealed how the media viewed their long-term impact on the monarchy. Articles about Camilla's legacy focused on her perseverance and eventual acceptance despite a difficult beginning. The coverage suggested that her story was one of redemption and gradual acceptance rather than natural triumph. Catherine's legacy was already being discussed in terms of her positive influence and future potential. Media coverage suggested that she represented the monarchy's successful evolution and its ability to attract talented, committed people to royal service. Articles about her legacy focused on inspiration and natural leadership rather than overcoming obstacles. The expert analysis coverage showed how royal commentators had internalized these different narratives. When royal experts discussed Camilla, they typically focused on her work ethic and dedication, suggesting that she had earned her position through effort and commitment. The analysis acknowledged her success while emphasizing how hard she had worked to achieve it. Expert analysis of Catherine consistently focused on her natural abilities and instinctive understanding of royal life. Royal commentators discussed her intuitive grasp of her role and her apparent ease with royal responsibilities. The analysis suggested that she was naturally suited for royal life, rather than someone who had to learn and adapt. The future coverage revealed different expectations and assumptions. Media speculation about Camilla's future role as queen focused on how she would support Charles and whether she would continue to grow into the position. The coverage suggested cautious optimism about her continued development in the role. Future coverage of Catherine assumed her success and focused on anticipating her eventual reign as queen. Media articles discussed her preparation for future responsibilities with confidence rather than uncertainty. The coverage suggested that her eventual queenship was something to anticipate with excitement, rather than concern about her readiness or suitability. This comprehensive examination of media treatment reveals how two women in the same family, holding similar positions, could receive vastly different coverage based on their paths to royal life and the initial narratives established about them. The patterns set early in their public lives continued to influence media coverage, even as both women proved their commitment to royal service and their value to the monarchy.